All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks where we are continually exploring the landscape of all things learning, employee development, workplace, and learning tech. I mean, it's a wide breadth of conversations. But today I'm joined by Rashim Mogha, and I think I nailed it, right? Was that pretty good?
You did it.
I told you I was going to try and make sure I got the short I right. So wasn't sure how that was going to go, but I'm glad I made it work. And she's from Skillsoft. So we're going to be talking. We are actually going to talk a little bit about Skillsoft because that's a name that I think pretty much anybody in our industry is familiar with. But a lot has happened over there, and it's a lot worth talking about. And that's actually going to drive to a lot of different conversations, some related to technology, some that are tied to leadership skills, development, coaching. I mean, you got a big portfolio. So we've got a big group of conversations we can talk about. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, it's exciting times. The education landscape and the learning landscape is changing. I'm excited to be here and talk about it today.
Yeah, I know. Well, and getting ready for this, it's always fun when people come back when we finally do the sessions because we have these conversations pretty far in advance a lot of
Yeah.
times. And I think originally Pluma was going to be on the show, and literally days before the event was the acquisition of Pluma with Skillsoft. And I remember the legal teams were like, I don't know, we can't do this right now, type of thing. So now we're back and we're finally going to be talking about that. But before we get into it, just for folks who may not be as familiar with you, so you are in the Bay Area, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That is correct. I'm 40 miles from San Francisco in Livermore.
Okay, all right. And how long have you been out there?
For, I want to say, close to 2008. So we're
Okay.
talking about, good 16, 17 years.
Okay. What brought you to the Bay Area originally?
Well, when I moved from India to the US, I actually moved to Chicago in February.
Okay.
And you can
In
imagine,
February. Oh, what a great time to come to.
great time, right? I would walk, my hotel was right across the office, and I would just cross that road in the morning and I would have snow on my eyelashes.
Oh,
So after 1 week,
okay.
I sent an email to my manager at that time and said, I need to be moved to the Bay Area because otherwise there would be a medical emergency that I'll have to deal with. So I got that's how I moved to the Bay Area. I moved to the Silicon Valley, and I have been here ever since.
Okay. Okay. I was gonna, yeah. All right. Because I'm always interested in the journey when people move around type of thing. And yeah, coming to Chicago in February, that's not the best time. I mean, Chicago's a great area. I've lived in the Illinois space, and Chicago can be a fun place to be. February, though, not the ideal time to get your first exposure to Chicago. So I can see
And
why you
remember,
wanted to move.
I in India, I'm from
Well,
Delhi.
well, yeah.
It's hot, hot, right?
I was gonna say you didn't come from like, I don't know, northern Canada or the tundra of Russia. So yeah, I'm sure that was a little bit of culture shock.
So for me, even San Francisco is cold. So I had to move out like 40 miles on the east
Yeah.
to be in a place that works for me, weather-wise and temperature-wise.
Okay. I can, well, and that is interesting because even for myself for a long time, and I've gotten to know a lot more folks in the Bay Area over the years as the tech boom's kind of blown up. But there is kind of, oh, California, and there's this universal idea of what California is like. And the Bay Area doesn't really like to play by those rules.
The microclimates, right? And they
Yeah.
come into play very much as you go in, depending on how close you go to the ocean versus how far you are
Right.
inland.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I've talked to folks there that they're like, well, it's not always 72 and sunny in the Bay Area. I'm like, oh, okay. That was a learning experience for me. Now, but it wasn't Skillsoft that you moved to Chicago and then ultimately the Bay Area. So what's been kind of your journey in the learning tech space, and how did that end up landing you at Skillsoft?
Yeah, I've actually touched practically every role in an organization. I started off as a developer, um,
Okay.
wrote books early on in my career. I remember writing a chapter. My first ever piece that I wrote was a chapter in A plus certification Bible at that time with John Wiley, and then realized the power of education and how you could impact so many people, and enjoyed that because I could still write pieces of code and do this and
Okay.
have that impact. I'm also big on making this world an equal world for all, Chris.
Yeah.
That's the value and the mission that I live with, and education is such a big part of that
It's a big
because
equalizer for sure.
talent is equally distributed, opportunities are not. How do you start bringing those opportunities in front of people, and how do you make sure that that we all work is a part of life now, we all work, but how are you working for a purpose? And that was important to me as well.
Okay.
So have been on the cutting edge of technology. VMware when virtualization was hot, AWS when cloud computing was hot, Oracle when bare metal was,
Oh
the whole
yeah.
concept of bare metal was coming
Yeah.
up, then robotic process automation. And really, my focus has been how technology, business, and leadership come together. So I've
Okay.
led product management, I've led customer acquisition, I've led customer advocacy, I've led enablement, I've led partner teams. And really, with Skillsoft, it was about how do we make sure that these three pieces of the puzzle, which is technology, business, and leadership, come together to create a workforce that really can unleash its potential.
Okay.
And that's
Eh,
how Skillsoft happened.
That's how Skillsoft happened. And you were already in the Bay Area. And so they said, hey, why don't you come? And you've been there, what, coming up on 2 years now?
Yeah, coming up on 2 years.
Okay. All right. So you work for Skillsoft, which depending on who you talk to in L&D and what their familiarity is with the vendor space, people may have a broad, because I look at it as a portfolio company. I mean, Skillsoft's in a fair amount of different areas and sectors in the
Yeah.
space, but not everybody may be aware of that. So when you say to people, I work for Skillsoft, and they go, okay, you're at the center of business, leadership, and tech. What Skillsoft? I mean, how do you describe it? How do you describe it to folks?
Yeah, so basically for me, we propel organizations and people to grow together through um, transformative learning experiences, right?
Okay.
With Skillsoft, look at our portfolio. Like, customers gain access to blended, multi-modular learning experiences that does more than just building skills. They grow as more capable, adaptive, and engaged workforce, right? And
Yeah.
that's what it is. Like, think about it. 70% of Fortune 1000 companies are basically using Skillsoft solutions. That's a huge
Yeah,
footprint.
you guys do have a fairly sizable market footprint, especially in big enterprises. I know that's for sure.
Yeah, so that's what Skillsoft is all about.
Okay. All right. So, but can we talk a little bit about the journey? Because I mean, even for me, my earliest engagement with Skillsoft, I kind of thought of Skillsoft as, well, they're the content company.
Yeah.
That in many were, and I think there's still plenty of folks out there who would be like, so yeah, Skillsoft, they're the content company. They do the content stuff, which is a yes and
And
type
a
of a
lot
situation,
more.
and there's some other things to it. So what has that? I mean, I know you've only been there 2 years, but I have to imagine you've seen some of the progression. And I know just from
Well,
following the
interesting.
industry, they've had to evolve.
Yeah, interestingly enough, Chris, I've known Skillsoft for over 20 years. The first ever project team, account team that I led was for Skillsoft, where I built out a team to create. And that
Really
time I was in a vendor organization that Skillsoft would use. So I
interesting.
really have memories of Skillsoft
Yeah,
for
you go back. You got the 20 years of like the 20 years ago Skillsoft that you were doing
correct.
stuff with.
But in last 2 years, a lot has changed, right? It has changed from a business perspective, from a platform perspective, and from a solutions perspective. So
Okay.
let's talk about that a little bit. From a business perspective, as you know, and many of our people in our audience would know, we went public last year. As
Yep,
part
that's
of
right.
going public, we also acquired global knowledge, and that just opened another avenue for our customers to leverage the virtual instructor led trainings and the instructor led aspect of learning as well.
Yeah, because before that, really, I think it was very much the asynchronous
Yeah,
digital
on demand
e-learning content,
content pieces.
on-demand
I would
content.
not just say e-learning because books have always been part of our portfolio,
True, that's fair.
audio summaries and events that we used to do.
Digital content. We'll say digital
Digital content.
on-demand
Yeah.
content. There you go.
And then within about a month of going public, we acquired Pluma, a digital coaching company.
Yep, and I'm very familiar with that because it it affected my lineup directly.
Sorry about that, but
Hey, I get it. I get it. The legal teams were all kind of like, I don't know what statements can even be said and all this kind of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, and that basically that came from a perspective in terms of as we were looking at the market, right? Having been a technology leader and having been a
Yeah.
business leader, knowing where the gaps were when I looked at upskilling and reskilling my teams, it was knowledge was an important part. What people also lacked and my leaders lacked was the confidence to use that knowledge in their everyday job, and
Yeah.
applicability became so important. And that's what coaching does. Basically, it helps you build that confidence in a safe environment to be able to use your leadership knowledge in your everyday job.
Well, and I
So
think that's a big we can take a little bit of a sidebar on this one, or maybe we can come back to it. But I think your point, and I think that was one of the things that was interesting, kind of watching the journey, because like you said, it was a digital content company for a good period of time, which then that kind of live component started growing, and then the coaching. I mean, it really was that, as my observation from the outside is Skillsoft grew into a bit more of a portfolio company that need to kind of go beyond, like you said, it's one thing to know something and go, yeah, I mean, cognitively, I know what I'm supposed to do, or I kind of have the bits and pieces, but translating that from head knowledge to action, it's a different stage.
it's very different. I'll give you an example. So I got my first experience with formal leadership development training when I was at VMware in 2011, 2012 timeframe.
Okay. As a
And
participant or as leading it?
as a participant, you're part
Okay.
of a hyper group, you're being groomed to be an exec, you go
Oh
into
yeah,
this,
It's like you get in
5 day
the like inner
beautiful,
circle.
yeah, 5 day beautiful, and there's a chip on the shoulder, right? You always
Oh
like,
yeah.
you're part of this leadership development program, you're groomed to be an exec now. You go to this beautiful 5 day leadership experience that they have carved out for you. I came back with my FIROB score. I was so excited, and so were 20 other people who were with me.
Yeah.
And
The food was amazing.
food was amazing, and there were a lot of aha moments too in the process,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The material that I came back with, which is still somewhere in my bookshelf over here, but then 5 days later, reality strikes in as you move into your
Yeah.
workspace, right? And then you're
Back to
leading
work.
your teams and you're saying, you know what? My situation is completely different. All those leadership lessons made sense, and I'm going to use them sometime later on in my
Sure.
career. Now is just not the right time because my situation is different. My team is different. My work is different. And interestingly enough, all 20 of us in that group felt the same way.
Yeah.
And that's where the disconnect happened. It was not that the leadership program was not good. It
No.
was just that there was, you know, we were very excited about the first meetup that happened after 1 month. By the second month and third month, that excitement fizzled out completely. And
I love the trend, which I mean, it's true of a lot of these things where it's like, but I think the point that you're bringing up, and I think this is where sometimes you can end up in this like argument back and forth where it's, oh, well, the leadership program wasn't good enough. And it's like, well, maybe that's not necessarily it. Because to your point, the stuff you covered was valuable. It was meaningful. It was relevant. it wasn't personalized necessarily to your unique situation, which there'd be no way to do that. There'd just
It's
literally
not
be no way to do
possible.
that effectively.
Yeah, and it was personalized to a certain extent, like exercises were relevant and everything else, but that continuity, that support system wasn't
Yeah.
there, that safe space wasn't there for me to experiment and get feedback. Like many times we get into situations, and as I talk to my leaders, they don't want the generic knowledge around things. They want to know,
No.
tell me where am I wrong? Tell me what I could have done better. And I'm mature enough to take that feedback, but somebody has to tell me, because if I would have known, then I would have already acted on it.
Yeah. Well, and I think to some degree, when you talk about some of this coaching thing, I almost it's very similar in some senses, and I know it's less taboo than it used to be, but talking to a psychologist in some ways when you're thinking about like your mental health, sometimes the psychologist is there to kind of help you process through, okay, well, they kind of know where they need you to get, but a good psychologist doesn't just say do this.
Yeah.
They help you kind of process and put these knowledge pieces together in your head and come up with, okay, I think I know what I need to do type of a thing. And I think coaching's doing a similar thing
Because
on
coaching
the
is a
performance
process of
standpoint.
reflection, it's a process of self
Yeah.
discovery, and that's what a coach leads you to be, because they're trying to get you to be the best version of yourself in that point in time.
Right, which is why, to your point on a traditional leadership program, whether again, whether a lavish 5-day, excursion, or even just the bare bones type leadership program, it's not that it's not personalized. It's just it's personalized for a different purpose. And I think that's where the coaching layers in. Well, there's some nuance and critical thinking. And like you said, the reflection and processing all this stuff. It's like, well, there's just no way that you can do that. You can do it on kind of a macro scale, but you actually need to carry that forward. So that was part of the journey, was kind of expanding the portfolio to say, this is a gap, which
Absolutely.
by the way, coaching has your acquisition timing was quite wise, because that space was growing quickly.
Absolutely. And for us, it was a very strategic decision, because imagine if you're catering to 70% of Fortune 1000 companies, and you want to bring that transformative experience. How would you do that? How would you democratize learning and coaching for everybody?
Yeah.
And so we did that. And after that, recently we acquired Code Academy to
Okay.
expand our footprint in the tech and dev space, because today everybody and everything touches technology.
Yeah, it's not a field you can not at least have some intersection with, regardless of what role in an organization you play.
Today you can't afford to say I'm not tech I
Tech
don't have
savvy.
technical knowledge, I'm not tech savvy, I'm not technical. We all
Mm-mm.
are. I mean, it's interesting to me how in about 2014, 2015, I still had to tell people that you are working on cloud, you have cloud technologies that you're working on.
Yeah,
Today it's can you
it's just
imagine,
an
it's
assumption. It's like, yeah, of course.
7 years and the conversation has completely changed.
Okay. So Code Academies, is that going much deeper? I'm familiar with it because I think I've toyed around with it in a couple areas, but that's going much deeper in technical skills, correct?
Absolutely. Python skills, your cloud computing skills, your Java skills, your programming skills, really in terms of how do you build your coding caliber, if you will,
Okay.
with hands-on experience. So that's Cloud Academy, and that is from the business perspective. Now,
Okay.
from a platform perspective too, we have a very robust platform through which these experiences are delivered. It's called Percipio,
Okay.
and we have had a lot of innovation in that space as well. So skills benchmarking, for example, reflections, how do you bring in multi-modularity and deliver multi-modularity through that enterprise platform that's so robust and gives you the analytics that you need as you start looking at your workforce and how that workforce needs to grow in terms of skills and talent that
Okay.
you need for your business to be successful. And then the third piece is the actual solution piece, the assets that we are building. So we recently launched, for example, our career journeys, which are basically multi-modularity blended experiences that focus on not just building knowledge, but also applicability.
Okay. So is this more, is that the most recent kind of like offering that Skillsoft's
That
bringing to the
is, it's
table?
about, I want to say, 1.5 to 2 months old now.
Okay. Okay.
As an offering. And what it does is the two career journeys that we have recently released. One is on cybersecurity, which is on the tech and dev side, and the other one is first time manager journey, which is
Okay.
more on the leadership and business side. And really, right before this conversation, we hopped onto this one. Chris, you and I were talking about what a
Yeah.
what a what I have to phrase this correctly. How challenging last 3 years have been for managers.
Yeah, it's been a rough one. I mean, and I think what was funny is we were joking about the fact that like it's always been rough. I
Yeah,
mean, stepping into a people leader role, especially like if you haven't done it before, it's never easy. It's never something that you just go, "Oh, yeah, wow, that was a simple step." But then you stacked on the pandemic and hybrid work and the just rapidly business transformation that was stacked on top of it. Companies were changing their entire business model and team skill, and it was like, hey, can you just lead your people through this type of a thing? It hasn't been a very, very fun time for people leaders.
it hasn't. And being a manager is not easy. I remember
No.
I was very early on in my career, I got an opportunity to be the manager 6 months into the job, and I failed miserably. It was horrible because
Yeah.
you have to suddenly realize that now 50% of your time is not your own, it's your team's time now. And then when it comes with a lot of emotional intelligence that you need to portray out as a manager. You have to think about things differently. And then what do you do when you're not comfortable in that environment? You go back to what you're comfortable doing. So you start behaving like an individual
Yeah, under
contributor.
stress, like that's the thing. It's and again, I think that's where those like 5-day programs, they can be helpful, but it's like your ideal environment where it's like, how would you handle this situation? And you're like, oh, you mean while I'm like well fed and comfortable and in this great environment of brilliant minds as well. Like, well, this is exactly how I would do it. And then you're in the trenches on Normandy Beach on D-Day, and it's like, that's not going to necessarily be your go-to because you haven't had the experience to do it yet.
Yeah, and there is nothing, this was such a wide gap, Chris, because there's nothing that exists in the market right now that talks about how do you really start thinking about individual contributors and bringing them into a leadership role, right?
Okay.
Not really leadership, I would say manager role, because everybody is a leader nowadays. Like individual contributors are
Yeah,
also.
we could get into the whole argument. I mean, there's tons of these arguments. Well,
Yeah,
is everybody a leader or is being a peer? But I get what you mean. Like these folks who you have not led others and been
yeah,
responsible and accountable for their behavior and their performance. And now they're reporting to you and you're kind of like shepherding. I mean, in some ways you're kind of playing the shepherd, and how do you get ready for that?
yeah. And then even that perception is changing. So when I was lead early on in my career 20 years ago, it was seen more of a parent role, right? Like
Okay.
this is your team, you're bringing them along. Today's generation is different. I don't want another parent. I have one set of parents and I don't want to have another set of parents, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
um
it is. So that's actually an interesting thing because you're positioned in a unique space, especially when we think about the fact that Skillsoft, like you said, you've got a footprint in 70% of these huge companies. You're a portfolio company, so you don't have this one narrow lens where you're only looking at it through, one thing. You've got kind of this content piece, so you can see kind of what's happening. You've got this coaching, you've got this leadership, you've got the tech. So you have a fair amount of lenses looking at this. I am curious on that in terms of that role shifting, because I actually had a conversation today about this in how what Gen Z is what the even just demographic makeup of Gen Z is bringing to the I mean, we've got a new generation that's going to be hitting the workforce hard, as they're starting to already, and those expectations are very different. So I'm curious if you are seeing any of those things. And I think you just hit on one where it's like, it used to be you're the manager, you're like the mom, or you're the dad for your team type of a thing. And it's like, now people are going like, nah, I don't need you to parent me and tell me what I can and can't do and set rules and all that kind of stuff. So how is that shifting?
And interestingly enough, some of the Fortune 1,000 companies that we work with, and many others beyond that, Chris, have these 4 or 5 generations right now in the workforce.
I know. Well, that's the
That's
challenge is you've got.
another piece of the puzzle. But the new, if you look at today's generation, right, and this is an epiphany that some of us are also having right now, right, that work is a part of life, work is not life, right? I want to do
Yeah,
something meaningful. I want to do something. What I realized in my 30s and 40s, this generation is realizing even before they're joining the workforce.
yeah.
I need to do something meaningful. I need to make an impact, right? I am going to bring my whole self into work, right? There's no compartmentalization of personal versus professional. We have also seen evolution of LinkedIn in past 2 years, right? It was strictly professional. Anytime anybody would post something personal, people would say, go to Facebook.
I
And
know.
now,
Oh, yeah. You'd see the rage posts where people were like, put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter. This
absolutely.
doesn't
And now
belong. You're
it's
like,
all, it's
it's all part of life.
part of life, right? This generation wants to invest in itself. They want to learn new things. And by the way, they just don't want to learn about what pertains to their current job. They want to gather knowledge. They're
Okay.
coming in from that perspective of realizing that the career that I pick up on day one when I join is probably not going to be the career for the rest of 20, 30, 40 years that I'm going to be in workforce. And by the way, probably I'm not even going to work for next 40 years. I'm going to probably work for next 10 years, right? The fire movement is really amping up now once again. It goes in cycles,
Okay.
uh, but that's how this workforce is thinking about. They're very purpose driven. Not that we were not, but they're more vocal about it.
Yeah, well, and again, it's one of those. What's been interesting from my lens, and again, just kind of like riffing off of this because it is fascinating to watch. I think there was a time when work and life was much more compartmentalized,
Yeah.
and that was kind of acceptable. It was like, well, you get a job not to fulfill your purpose; you fulfill your purpose somewhere else. You just go in, you do your thing, you come home, you get a paycheck, and then you have your life. And that has shifted, and I think technology has been a big driver because, well, you don't really disconnect. I mean, literally, this thing's in your pocket 24/7, so there's really not a time that you ever go, I mean, honestly, you talk to some people and it's like, do you take a work device on vacation? And probably the average person would be like, well, yeah, because I just never know if something's going to happen. And that integration has kind of forced people to say, this is a different way of looking at it. And I think this next generation, to your point, is looking at it wildly different and the
They're much
pandemic
more
seems to only
smarter.
accelerate it.
Yeah, but they're much more smarter than at least my generation, or if I take myself as an example, in terms
Okay.
of building those boundaries as well, right?
Okay.
If I'm recharging, I'm truly recharging. And my
True.
definition of recharging can be different and it can involve technology, but it doesn't always necessarily have to involve work. And that differentiation is becoming clear now, right? Um,
Yeah.
when I was, the way I was inducted in the work generation was, this is work, this is your life. You
Okay.
spend 16, 20 hours every day into it. Today's generation knows that work is a part of life, and that is the differentiation, and they know it very early on in their life.
Yeah. They don't hit the midlife crisis type thing where all of a sudden, at 40 or
That
50, they
epiphany
go,
happens.
yeah, they go, what have I been doing my whole life? And then they just rethink things. They're doing that coming out of school or whatever and going like, no, I'm not gonna sign up for that and potentially burn these
Yeah.
years of my prime, not recognizing that boundary.
Yeah.
So how is that affecting? I am curious on that from a skills standpoint, though, because we can talk about this just from an impact on, again, and we're seeing this with hybrid work and work from anywhere and,
Yeah.
where is the workplace? I mean, this is affecting literally everything that exists. But I am curious from a skills standpoint, when you look at that, how is that shaping some of the power, human, whatever skills that leaders are having to bring? Because that is different. And I think one of the really unique things I'm seeing is it's not the same for everyone. I think sometimes we take this like universal lens of like, well, this is what this generation wants now. And I hate that because I'm like, well, no, there's still people that have different perceptions. So I'm curious how that's actually affecting the skills that need to be developed in managers.
Absolutely. And remember that also today's generation is more aware of themselves as well, right?
Okay.
So they are also very vocal about who they are as people and what do they bring to the table. And we have to respect that. So as managers, as you start thinking about leading a multi-generational workforce, and you're right, we can't generalize it.
Yeah.
We have to personalize it. That leadership needs to be personalized. That management needs to be personalized for each individual. And that takes skill, because put aside the multi-generational piece for 1 minute
Right.
and think about it from your workplace. You have employees who come into office, you have employees who are hybrid, and then you have employees who are remote. Then look at it from a diversity perspective. The diversity numbers, we are all aiming those numbers to go up. So you have people from different genders, races, um, you know, ethnicity. They're neurodivergent people now who are becoming, who are coming into the workforce and saying and identifying themselves as neurodiverse, and their needs are different, and every individual's need is different. So how do you personalize management in such a way that it's effective, and then how do you bring them all together so that they work
Yeah,
cohesively,
so that they work together.
right?
Right.
So it's not just you as a manager managing these individuals. How are you enabling trust being built
Okay.
in these various people
Across,
involved?
because it's no longer just this one unilateral, like I'm managing each individual in this
Correct.
separate thing. You're also having to think about, well, yes, and how are you actually building a coherent team that works well together amidst all this diversity?
And then you have to start thinking about it. So communication plays a big role. How do you provide psychological safety is a big skill that you have to start thinking about.
Okay.
How do you build shared vision is a skill that you have to think about. How do you build a culture of growth mindset in your team? How do you build innovation? How do you allow for innovation in a team? Right, all these things become so important. And for most importantly is, how do you translate all this into products and solutions that you are building? Because essentially your team is a snapshot or a mini version of the diverse audience that you have for your products and services.
Okay.
So then how do you bring in all this and create something that works for your customer base?
Okay.
And that's the hardest part, right? So you have to think about it almost from a lens of not just people and
Yeah.
leadership, but from a lens of business as well. And that's
Okay.
why I said that sweet spot of technology, business, and leadership becomes so important then.
Okay.
So to give you an example, when we started looking at all these elements at Skillsoft, right?
Yeah, because I was going to say
Multi-modularity.
what you just described there could literally, right?
Yes.
They could just, you could end up in analysis paralysis, going, all right, that's great. That sounds impossible.
So the multi-modularity offerings that we have, right? Which
Okay.
are not just e-learning, but books, audio summaries, live events, leader camps that we do, coaching that we have introduced, hands-on reflections. Each person learns differently. And that's why it becomes important to address that. And you can't generalize everything. You can't generalize and say, oh, the older the generation prefers instructor led trainings and
No,
the
you
newer
can't.
generation prefers
Right.
e-learning.
They like apps. They like this
You
whatever.
know, there are some nuances to it, but
Yep.
every individual is different, right? My 7-year-old daughter still loves to read books, even though she also consumes the same books through apps as well, but she
Okay.
still likes the paper feel, right? So
Okay.
every individual is different and you have to cater for them. And this puts a lot of pressure on the managers then to start thinking about how are they going to manage effectively, and leaders in terms of how are they going to lead effectively. And that's the skill set that we have to now start developing. I want to highlight one thing. World Economic Forum just released the top 10 skills that are
Okay.
required, right? And also top 10 jobs that are going to become, im- you know, uh, that are going to be very, very in demand in
Okay.
2025.
High demand. Yeah,
High
top
demand,
in
right?
demand jobs
So 7 out of 10 jobs are actually tech jobs. But the skills that are required, 8 out of
are
10,
not.
are leadership skills,
Okay.
business skills, because that's where the tying happens. It's not that tech leaders do not know the tech skills, they develop those skills, but the leadership skills are left behind somewhere
Yeah.
because the
Well,
focus
and
is.
I'm trying to think. I had a conversation. I don't remember when it was. It might have been a couple of weeks ago where we were actually talking about this on the show that there used to almost be a kind of an acceptance that, well, your technical people, they're just really technical and they don't need this stuff. That just keep them kind of behind the firewall and doing their thing.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have like our leadership or our people, and they're going to be over here. And then we'll try and find a handful of people that are this mediary that serve in between. And now that's not, it's like, no, that's not the case. If you are hyper
It's not
technical, you have to have these skills.
it's not optional anymore. I've led
No,
tech
it's
teams
not.
before, and I know what a nightmare it was to try and manage um, tech people who did not have effective communication skills or negotiation skills, and they would walk into these meetings, and then there were a flurry of HR emails that I had to deal with. um, I'm telling you, it's true. And it was not because that they came from a place of not being collaborative or anything.
Yeah.
It's just that they hadn't honed those skills
No.
because you're completely different when you're sitting down there and looking at it from a technology perspective. Now, I'm not generalizing it. I'm not saying that all, everybody who is a developer or in the tech
No, I get what
ecosystem,
you're saying. It's not
you
a
know
general that like, oh, if you're in tech, you're a total square when it comes to social interaction. I get that's not what you're saying. Because I mean, honestly, I even think back to my early days in people leadership. You just and I hate saying even understanding, like I wish there had been a class that I could have taken in getting ready to be a people leader on navigating organizational politics. Like that was a skill of just even understanding, how do you understand how to work in between, the political lines, and recognizing, how do you not let your identity become, well, I just become something that I'm not, but at the same time not going, well, this is just how I am, so I'm just going to let it rip and go, well, that's also not, I think that's kind of what you're getting at, where it can be like,
yeah,
well, this is how
or
I
how to
act, and so I
showcase
just
how
am this way.
Yeah, or how to showcase the value of the piece of code that you're writing or your team is building, right? And translate into business objectives, or how to negotiate timelines and how to start thinking about things differently. Um,
Yeah.
those are the skills that are so important.
Well, and those we're picking on the tech folks a little bit here. But I mean, in reality, I mean, I'm a learning person, and this is a skill that in learning and development is a gap as well. I mean, and I think just as an example that I'll give you that I can think back to, that we won't pick on the tech folks anymore. I remember leading a team once, and one of the people on the team was going to talk about one of our projects that we were doing in front of a group of the executive stakeholders. And they started nerding out on the way they developed the digital content. And it was that kind of thing where it's like, they don't care. Like, they do not understand the timelines and the variables and the triggers. And like, they don't care about that. They don't even know what you're talking about. And you're losing your audience right now, type of a thing. And I think that's where that, you're excited about your jam, but how do you be excited about your jam and then translate that to the audience you're speaking
How do
to?
you get others excited about your jam?
Yes. Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about here. So then how you talked about this multimodality piece that is, I'm guessing it's taking a shift away from, the, hey, we want to do leadership development, we're going to ship you off to corporate for 5 days, dazzle you with the best of the best and then send you back home. When you say this kind of multimodality, are you talking, is this like almost a journey in some ways, a development journey for people? Or how are you approaching that? Or how are you thinking about the development?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Chris. And by the way, this is what a transformative leadership experience is. If you start thinking about it, right? You bring that awareness in your audience in terms of, yes, you have to upskill and uplevel yourself. You have to start thinking about where the gaps are. You have to start building knowledge around it, and then you have to identify your blind spots in terms of how does this knowledge translate into actionables for me, and contextualize it, which happens through coaching. And then a reinforcement that then happens through targeted journeys that are role based. So for
Okay.
example, if I am a first time manager, let's start thinking about what are the key competencies that we you require, right? For our career journey, we looked across the board. We had a group of design partners work with us. We identified 20 key competencies that any first time manager needs to be successful. And
Okay.
these competencies were around critical thinking, focusing on your team wellness, for example, how to be inclusive. And then we bundled them into 8 units, if you will.
Okay.
Around four of them that focus on yourself, and four of them focus on the team. Because remember that you have to continue growing as well. So your individual
Fair
growth is
point.
also so important as part of it. And then to achieve those goals, you bring in various experiences. So you bring in group coaching into that, you bring in e-learning, you bring in books, you bring in summaries, you bring in live experiences, you bring in virtual instructor led. But the end goal for that is to be able to do a project that's customized to you. So for example, if Rashim Mogha is a first time manager, what does her team skills look like right now? Who are the people on her team, and what are their strengths? So that when it comes to structuring her team, aligning with the work that they do, how can she best leverage the strengths of this team,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And then you go through all of those 8 units. At the end, you do a capstone project, and what you walk away with is basically a template that you can use to lead your team. And by the way, it's not just a template that was created by somebody else, you created it. So as your team changes, as your stakeholders change, as you embark on new responsibilities, you know how to change that template.
Okay. Okay. So two things I want to follow up on this that I'm really curious about is, so one, on the, I love that you brought up the self-development alongside. I think sometimes that's often missed when we think about developing leaders. We're always like, okay, we need to develop you, so we're going to tell you what you need to do for everyone else, which I will just, when I talk to folks who say, I want to be in a people leader role, one of like my biggest things is like, do you want to serve others? Because if you're out for yourself, just get out of the space, like get out of that lane. Because I think that is a really important thing. But I think sometimes we can over index on that and forget, if you're not growing and taking care of yourself, like you're not even going to have the capacity to give to these people that you're leading. So I think it's interesting you bring that point up, because I do think that gets overlooked a lot.
Yeah, and then there's this misconception that existed in the industry for a long, long time, which is basically leaders and managers are know all, right? The reality
Yeah.
is, in today's world, nobody knows all. There's no concept of an expert because things are evolving so quickly. We all
Yeah.
are practitioners now, right? And that is an important differentiation, that leaders and managers do not know it all. What they do have as a skill is the ability to go tap into the right resources to get the responses that they want or the
Okay.
solutions that they are looking for,
They
right?
know how to navigate those
They know
pieces and
how to
help remove the
navigate,
barriers or help grease the skids or whatever that is.
and they know how to think about it from a holistic point of view, the situation
Okay.
from a
The
holistic
bigger
point of
picture
view,
piece.
bigger picture, which sometimes we miss when we are working in silos or working as just individual projects.
So let me ask a question on this one then, because I am curious. Obviously you're doing a lot with this. That perception of, what, stepping into a leadership, well, we'll say management role. Okay. So we don't get anybody up in arms about that. But stepping into that, has there been a recognition or a shift, or do you see resistance with this acceptance of, you don't have to have all the answers? Because I think sometimes that leaves people stepping into this feeling overwhelmed. And I think there has been this historic, like, well, once you're here, you have to have the answers to everybody's questions, which can crush somebody stepping into a new leader role, feeling like, I don't have all the answers. Do you see resistance to people accepting that it's like,
Oh yeah.
you don't have to?
Oh yeah, people I had a hard time saying I don't know it early on in my career. Very hard time. I almost felt like I had to cram all the books before I went into all team meetings because of that. I know I dealt with it when my some of my team members went through the Scrum and Agile training. While I came from a waterfall background, getting my
Okay.
PMP early on, and that I did not feel comfortable and safe in front of that team until I got my Scrum
Okay.
certification. But that has changed. It's a mindset change. It takes
Okay.
time, and it's a mindset change from three perspectives: from an individual's perspective who is leading the team, from the team's perspective, and then from an organization's perspective as well,
Yeah.
right? So we almost have to provide that psychological safety to the managers to be able to come out and say, you know what, great question, but I don't have an answer for this. Let's try and figure it out together.
Okay. Well, and I think that hits on an important point, that when organizations are looking at this, and I think this is where sometimes the knee jerk, let's just train our managers on, whatever, it's like it can't stop there. Because to your point, with that example, if you still have, and there are still organizations that are there today where it's not okay to say, I don't have the answer, but I'll get that
Yeah.
for culturally in the organization. Like, you better not
Yeah.
say that in an organization. And I think that is one of those things where you have to recognize, if you prepare a bunch of managers to do that, and then they walk into their first meeting and go, unfortunately, I don't have the answer for you right now, but I can get that and connect the right people. And they get curb stomped for not having the answer. You got to recognize, like, there is some holistic work you have to do organizationally to make this happen.
Absolutely. And that's why I said it's work at three levels, right?
Yeah.
And organization cultures, that's why have to change. And this work that I'm seeing right now, but there's long ways to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and this just ties back to all these things we've been talking about the whole time about how the industries shift. I mean, companies are shifting, business transformation, technology, integration of work and life. And I mean, all this stuff is happening. So we're kind of in the thick of it, which then leads me to my next question on this is, how are you seeing people and how are you working to make this fit into the busy and kind of chaotic lives that people have? Now, I posted about it last week. There's a report out that says like the next thing L&D needs to do is make their mission, make everything in the flow of work. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no, not everything needs to be in the flow of work. Is there a time? But there is this kind of like, how do you fit this? Because everybody's life is a little bit different. So how as you think about that, are you fitting things closer to the flow of work in some areas, but also saying sometimes you actually need to pull that out of the flow for that reflection?
Yeah, and that's a great question because everybody learns differently, and we have to identify and recognize that. For me, I like my own quiet time. So I
Okay.
personally take out 30 minutes every day. That's my scheduled time to learn something new. And by the way, it cannot happen between one call that I just finished, 30 minutes of free time, and the other call that I'm going to pick up.
Are you
Doesn't work.
suggesting you can't just take the 5 minutes in between the Zoom calls that you have to quick pack in your leadership development?
Doesn't work for me. It might work for some
Oh,
other
okay.
people. Remember, we all learn different, right? But then there is just in time knowledge, right? Which is
Yes.
basically, how do I quickly do this? Is there a way for me to integrate this skill into something? I'm sending out an invite for a meeting.
Okay.
Is there a quick agenda template that I should look at? Are there any 2 3 best practices that I can look at in terms of to make this invite more acceptable to others or more powerful, so that people don't keep wondering, why am I being called into this meeting with no context for this
Yeah.
meeting, right? Why do you want 30 minutes of my precious time without even telling me what this meeting is all about? And it cannot just be with the title catch up, right?
Yeah.
um
Okay.
so we have to identify, like, some knowledge requires you to be in that creative space in your mind.
Okay.
um and uh that is where you need that carved out time, because you have to almost switch off your operational brain to bring up your creative brain.
Yeah.
um the second thing is, their skills and hard skills that can be leveraged with the flow of work. So for example, our integration with Microsoft Viva, that helps you start thinking about things differently and allows you to share. For example, if you're mentoring somebody in your workplace and there is a great course that you want them to look at, allows them to share through Microsoft Teams to be able to say,
Okay.
hey, here's a quick one that you had a question about this with me, you and I were just talking. Here's a quick one that can help you. So
Okay.
it has to be a combination and a blend of both. And it's really up to the individual in terms of how they want to consume it. That freedom, because everybody learns differently, has to be provided to the audience, but the mechanism has to be built in.
Okay. Okay.
So even for
Well,
our career journeys, for example, Chris, the way we crafted them is that not everything is mandatory and required in those journeys, right? You
yeah,
might have
I
a
think that's an
different way
important
of
part.
acquiring that knowledge, and you don't have to sit through an instructor led class or an e learning to be able to acquire that knowledge. You have the freedom, as long as you can focus on the applicability part. How you gather and gain knowledge, we want to provide you flexibility in that.
That's and I want to make sure I give us enough time, but I think that piece is a mindset shift that is really, really important when we think about addressing the needs of kind of the continued diverse workforce. Is this whole idea that completing every object in a journey is not necessarily a success metric, because there are things where people are bringing things that they already have, or they have other things that they may need, or they may say this isn't relevant to where I am right now, type of a thing. And I think historically we've kind of been like, well, but if they don't do everything, then it's not working. And I think we saw that with MOOCs. When MOOCs first came out, everybody thought they were a failure because people didn't complete every activity till they started looking and going, are you getting what you came to get out of this? And they realized, whoa, like high percentages of people actually are.
The reality of the thing is, Chris, as much as we all would like it to be different, one of the crucial KPIs for L&D teams or any learning teams still remains how many people completed the training, what is the CSAT score. Like, we haven't moved past that in terms
No.
of thinking about it from a perspective of what is the business impact that this learning made, right? And when you're measured on things like that, then your focus is also different, and the solutions that you're going to develop is going to be different because you're solving for the wrong things then.
Yep. And I think that's where kind of this start with the end in mind sometimes becomes the most important part. Because like, well, if you know what you're trying to accomplish, it's a lot easier to say, well, what do we need to do to be able to accomplish that? But then even within that, it's like, well, but what everybody needs to be able to accomplish that might look different. And we need to be okay with the fact that some people might need more, some might need less, some might need different. And so how do we offer a portfolio of things? So I told you we were going to run out of time, and I know you have a hard stop because you've got to get to something, and I do as well. So I'm going to wrap us up, because if I don't, the question I was going to ask as a follow-up would just open a can of worms that would have us going for much longer than we have time for. So last kind of comment here is, if people are interested in kind of figuring out more, or just even your journey, I think your journey and the journey you've been on has been really fascinating. What is the best way for people to kind of follow up with you or find out what some of this stuff is?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, and I will connect you with the right people who can help you with what you need to know. Or if you're interested in knowing more about me or what I'm doing, LinkedIn is the best place to reach out to me.
All right. Well, and what's funny is the fact that you bring up the Skillsoft's footprint in organizations. I can't tell you how many times that I've been in organizations where people didn't even realize there were resources available that the organization had. And again, I think that's where it was valuable for me to kind of take some time breaking down what is Skillsoft now, because if you're operating off a 20-year-old perception, you may be like, oh, we have Skillsoft, but that's not what I need. And it's like, well, Skillsoft may be much broader than what your perception of what it is. So absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time. This was great. Thank you so much for being here. I hope this will not be our last conversation. It's truly been a pleasure. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and I don't keep you late to your appointment. And thanks for being here. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. Hopefully this helped you in a multitude of different areas, because I know we covered a lot of stuff. Hope you have a great week.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Have a great one. See you, everybody.